So welcome to the video, Use of Self. Now, early on in my training career, I had little to no awareness that I could use myself intentionally as an instrument to facilitate change and learning. I thought you just showed up, gave some instructions, debriefed activities, did another activity. I really want to credit Dr. Bailey Jackson from UMass Amherst, as well as some of the group dynamics classes I took there. Bailey also gently nudged me to do the National Training Lab NTL Holding On, Letting Go, where I got a much clearer sense of all the emotions and where they're coming from and how I need to navigate those. And LCY Cross Associates, many of their key leaders just reinforce this concept of clear instrument, use yourself as instrument. And so over time, I've realized that how I show up, how I use myself are just critical in creating the environment and facilitating learning. So that's what we're going to talk about today. Because when we're a clear instrument, present in the moment, we can intentionally diagnose and choose how we want to use our personal voice. What I mean by that, it's like pairs, the share part, the S of pairs. How do I want to share my feelings, stories, examples, share the impact of what I'm experiencing, the impact of what I think I notice others are experiencing, all of that. So, what are some principles for sharing personal stories and reactions? Well, for me, how do I decide when? I kind of go into my gut and ask myself, will this add value? Does it really meet the learning needs in the moment? Not necessarily the overall learning needs, but in that moment, the needs are what is folks got need. Will this fill something that's missing? Are participants not coming in, sharing, supporting, offering a different perspective? And if I ask participants to come on in, no one does, that might be a time I'm filling in a hole. And is it necessary? In this moment in time, is it necessary? And we'll talk more about that in a minute. I believe that in the welcome and framing is a critical time to show up and use yourself. It's a great place to be authentic and vulnerable and real. And so as I mentioned in one of the first, I think, couple videos on design, when we're doing the welcome, telling stories about how you are learning, you're growing, what you used to be like, what happened, what you're like now. Examples or story that really show your passion. You might share feelings about that, tell a story. Why the work is critical to you personally, why you're committed to this work, and why you're committed to deepening your own diversity, equity, inclusion, social justice competencies every single day, and why you show up and so committed to support others to deepen their capacity as well. Now, as you're sharing, not only in the welcome, but throughout the session, I want you to be aware, are you sharing only out of your privileged groups, only out of your marginalized? I believe there needs to be a balance, and particularly coming out of your privileged often enough that as you're asking people to look at privilege, you've already shown up in many stories where you've responded effectively to use your privilege, and other times you've been ineffective and benefited, quote, from privilege at the expense of others. In the welcome and framing, you might also want to share some of your feelings about current national events, recent ones, and international dynamics. What's been the impact on you? What's been the impact on others? Now, another way to share personal story is privilege to privilege group. So if someone out of their marginalized identity shares a story, an example, an opinion, and a privileged group member or even another marginalized group member disagrees, challenges, dismisses, overlooks, you can use your voice to say, I heard you. And one way to do that would be, I've seen actually something very similar. Actually, it's a pattern. Many of the organizations I've been to, I've seen that same thing. So something to affirm the original story or comment. Now, people can still disagree, but when they disagree right away, it can really feel discounting. You might also want to say, what the story you just described, I've done that, and I've seen many other people in my privileged identity do that. Now, you can also share privilege to privilege if a privileged group member missteps. They say something offensive. And so, especially if the group you're anticipating could come at them, I want to have dialogue, but I want the person whose behavior was a misstep or had a negative impact to be able to hear and learn. So I may come in first and say, you know, I've thought that too, I've said that too. My intention is to relate in, to keep them open, to stay engaged in the learning so that we can have a dialogue. I might say, I was taught that, and now someone coached me and I understand something new. What I was like, what happened, what I'm like now. By the way, that's a 12-step strategy I learned a long time ago. You can also do marginalized to marginalized. So again, if someone in a marginalized identity that you are also in that group shares something and it plops, you may say who relates if nobody comes in. Then I might come in and say, I've experienced that, and I've seen many people in our group experience that. Another way to share at that moment is talk about the feelings as you hear the stories. You don't have to add another story, but marginalized to marginalized, you can say, as I hear you, I join you, I just feel so, whatever that might be. Just so proud you shared that, so angry that that's such a common dynamic. So you're looking for where people are not connected with, related to, affirmed, plops, dismisses, and how to use your voice out of your privileged and marginalized identities to have more conversation, dialogue, and have all perspectives considered. Now, another way to use your voice is privileged to marginalized. So similarly, if someone shares out a marginalized identity and nobody says anything, you can say, well, actually, I've actually seen that, I've done it, I've said it. Every group I get to, people tell me very similar stories. I always do that usually only after I first tried to get people engaged. Who has seen similar dynamics? I'm trying to get group members to engage each other and learn the skills of relating and connecting, validating, being there for each other in community. Now, a whole nother conversation can be, you're thinking about sharing reaction stories. So how deep and authentic do I go? And I generally share with folks, think about how deep you want the participants to go and then model 1 or 2 layers deeper. You've got the surface layer, maybe all the way down to 10, which is very deep and probably not for workplaces for sure, and probably not even for workshops, 2, 4, even 8 hours. If it's a deep retreat, if it's an intensive development lab, that might be a different conversation. And so if I want people to share about socialization and examples and the impact as they think about it, that might be a level 2 if I'm going from 0 to 10. And so I want to be a 3 or 4 and just share a little more honest. I want to be careful not to go too deep and honest and raw, because people, A, may scare themselves, or they'll follow my example and will go to places they didn't anticipate and then may not know how to come back to where they feel more comfortable as well as willing to engage. Now, before you go deep, I want you to double check. What are you sharing? Is it adding value? Is your intention to help with learning? Or is your intention really you're working your own issues, trying to think things through and using the group to do that? Now, related could be, especially if you're not as present or you got an intuitive insight to share a story you've never shared. What if you share a new unfiltered story and you begin to have an immediate shame attack or a fear attack? And when I've done that, my thoughts are, oh, if I said too much, why did I say that? What's going to be the impact? Was I clear? And I start spinning. And so what's useful to me is, instead of being in that awkward place of, I don't know, to just ask, can anybody relate? What's your reaction to what I just shared? And I might even get on and say, that's the first time I've shared that story. I'm curious what the impact was or if anybody relates. So I'm not saying you have to prepare every single story, but I know the 4th time I've told a story, I feel more confident and I'm often more clear. And the first time I'm either on quicksand or walking on eggshells. And so if you notice, it's a triggering event cycle, kind of step 4, where you have those thoughts. Did I say too much? Oh no, what do they think? Am I not that competent? Just kind of shift those by asking the group for feedback. And usually every time I've done it, people come in and say, I really appreciate your story. I appreciate your vulnerability. I relate. What comes up for me is, so just a thought. I also want you to remember that we don't have any control over the impact of what we share on other folk. It'll vary based on group membership, their life experiences, what issues are up for them, what intrapersonal roots might get re-triggered in the moment, or they're coming in already with some of them activated. And all of these are probably related to group identity, but not completely. And so before you share, you may want to pause and reflect, how might what I'm about to say or share impact people across group memberships? And I may think I'm coming out of a marginalized identity as lesbian, and I will always be seen as white. And so how I engage, how I come across, I have to remember I have multiple privileged and marginalized identities in the moment. And particularly me, I've got so many privilege that the power of my voice, I want to be very aware of as I use it. I want to ask, is this a useful time to share now, or if at all, or maybe later? We can't control the impact of our comments, our stories, our feelings. And people will feel triggered probably no matter what we do, and we can be very thoughtful and intentional. It's a both and. And you may have seen this on Google Images or Pinterest, the share before you think. And I just looked it up again to get what somebody said it was true. Is what you're sharing true for you? And so to kind of go inside and say, is this really authentic and true for me? Or am I replicating what I was taught? Or I'm just saying something because I think people want me to say it. So for me, I want to only share things that are true for me. And my T is thoughtful. Have I thought through the impact? Have I got centered enough so I'm making a conscious, intentional choice to share? Now, I'm not always there, but generally I try to be. The H is helpful, will be helpful to the group in this moment, helpful to advance learning outcomes. Now, whoever wrote this, I was inspiring. I like that. Mine, though, I think is intentional. Am I intentionally choosing? Does it align with my positive intentions of what I hope for the group? One I'll talk about a bit more is necessary. Is it necessary in this moment? And finally, K is kind. Am I being kind? Now, I'm not saying you have to smooth over the conflict. And there are ways I can be confrontive. There are ways I can raise issues that are also respectful and meet the dignity of the person. And that's what I mean by kind. So related to this is, when do I invite others to come in and share, and how do I decide if I lead and share first? And for me, that's related to the end, the necessary in this. Someone's made a comment, someone asked a question. For me, I'm thinking, is what I'm about to say what's needed in this moment? Is it necessary? What I'm about to say, will it take us off track and really not really be related to what's going on in the moment? Would it be better if another group member says it? Because I really believe that peer-to-peer engagement really trumps what I might say generally. And so if another participant can make a similar point, share a related story, or just share something brilliant that I never thought of, I think it's generally best to invite others in to react, unless it's a real critical moment, unless there's been negative impact and you want to come in to prepare the ground so there can be dialogue. If we're in a general conversation where people may emotionally be at a -2, 3, maybe 4, but not deeply triggered, I generally always invite folks in to react first. But if nobody comes in, or it's not quite on point, or there's still an issue that needs to be addressed, then I'll usually add my voice, and I'll do it to spark dialogue. I might give the group something to play off of. I'm going to give an example or say something to say, what do y'all think about that? Especially if the group is not very verbally engaging. That's another time to share more occasionally if you can't get folks to verbally engage. If there's still nothing from the group, then I might share another quick example or two and say, any other ads, anybody relate who's got something? If I still don't get much, then I don't know why, but it could be people don't feel safe, they don't feel brave. There might be hierarchical dynamics in the room. And so it might be a clue. It just might be a lot of introverts in the room. So it just might be a clue to have those 3x5 cards around, or do a gallery activity where I might say, you got 3 choices. Everybody's got to write something. And then we'll trade them and just read them into the room. One could be, do you have some examples like we're talking about that you're willing to write out? Again, anonymous, no names, just 2 or 3 sentences that will just add to our learning. Either you've experienced, heard from a credible source, you've observed. But people may not have examples. So I'd say, if you don't have an example, then why don't you write about what do you feel, what it's like to not have an example to share? So we're talking about racism in the organization, racist microaggressions. And, one participant shared something, no one else came in. I shared a couple that are generic to many organizations, nobody came in. Then I might move to this activity. And I might say, either as a white person, person of color, indigenous, multiracial, biracial, if you don't have an ad, what's that like? What are you feeling, realizing you don't have any other examples of racist microaggressions to add? And then the third option you give people is, what's the example of hearing my 3 examples in the original first example? Knowing that there's probably 1,000 out there, we just don't know them yet. Have people write, fold them, trade them 5 times, collect them up, having people read them into the room, and or you can put them into small groups, because if it's the dynamic is the large group, put them in groups of 6 or 7, have them read what they wrote, and then have them talk. And by then, that should be enough fodder to get some of the conversation going. All right. So what do you do? How do you use your voice when someone offers a comment that seems off track? It's not exactly in line where you think the group is or where you want the group to go. So before you do anything, I want you to get clear in your intentions, because mine are, I want to leave no one behind. And I might say to myself, kind of that self-talk at step 4, at least they're engaging, at least they're participating, and maybe there's something useful in the comment that I don't quite see yet. That helps me not feel as irritated that I'm like, oh, they're taking us off track, they're dominating airtime. That's the unproductive comments I can make. I've been given feedback that people have been in a number of my workshops say that they really appreciate how I work to find something useful, something I can use in every comment that comes out. I engage, and then I might redirect to get back on the path that I thought we were on or what I wanted the group to go. And so I could relate in, make a connection, then I might reframe, just massage it enough that I can make it useful. And again, on the Q&A calls, if you have examples of people that say things that seem to be way off track, we can together come up with how we might respond so that the person sharing it still saves face. And the other thing is, there could be something in there, a gem hidden in there that I just don't see, but others might. Now, if I'm really like, I don't get this, but I could ask a question to dig deeper. And I might say, so how is what you said related to what we've just been talking about? Because they may see the connection. And if they kind of look like a deer in headlights, I might say, who else sees the connection? Get the group involved. Now, at times that I don't see the connection and maybe I'm like 5 minutes to break, I want to park it. And so I will either have a chart up on the wall and have a parking lot, or I'll say, let me write that down and we'll come back to it after break. And let's just finish up what we're doing here. If you don't have a break coming up and you want to park it, I just came up with this metaphor. It is early baseball season now. You could say, I'm going to put them in the batter's box is what I'm thinking to myself. And so what I'll say publicly is, I want to come back to your comment, but I want to make sure we finish what we're talking about and see if there's anything else related to what X just said. And so it's acknowledging their comment, saying I'll come back to it, but not having us go off track. Because what happens often is folks in privileged groups start to feel uncomfortable. They'll try to take it a different way. And folks in marginalized group who are having effective conversations, stories, feelings, talking about the truth from their perspective, I want to make sure that has felt there's enough before we go a different way. All right. So I want to take a moment, talk about intuitive thoughts, because when I'm in the flow, when I'm really in it, having fun, things are working on all cylinders, then I get all types of intuitive thoughts, ideas, just come into my mind like popcorn. And I haven't planned for it. I'll have a story pop into my mind that I maybe haven't told in years or ever. And if I trust my body and I go with it, usually it's really powerful. But I have to be a clear instrument, good sleep, good self-care, worked on my triggers so that when these ideas come in, I get them. Now, some people like me believe it's my guides talking to me, but you may not believe in that sort of thing. I want to give you another concept that I got from the LCY Cross Associate folks that I got to be consulting with for, 15 years or so. They talked about this concept, parallel process. Parallel process. Again, it may come out of group dynamics, human relations work. It's the idea that in the moment, what's going on in my body, or if I'm co-facilitating, what are the dynamics between the two of us at breaks, at lunch, while we're training, we could be reflecting what's really happening in the room. And so we might be vessels, or if I'm doing it by myself, then my body, literally, my emotions might be a vessel, my thoughts of what's unsaid in the room. It's all unconscious. So I know this may sound woo-woo to some people, but it really is about energy. And so in the moment, I just might have a physical sensation that I'm like, what is this? And so I just might say, my chest got tight just now, and I don't know why. Anybody else feeling something? So I can pan and then share. If I'm paying attention, then I might pick up on something, again, the unsaid. And if I just move into it, I can invite other people to say the unsaid or the not yet said in the room. So again, I have to pay attention to my body, my psyche, my feelings, notice unexpected or random thoughts and feelings. And just remember, in every workshop, I could be being used as a vessel for what needs to be said in the room. So here's some ways that I've done that. I might say, I could be wrong, but I'm getting a sense that, and then I'll say whatever's coming to me. Another way to do that is I'm wondering if something's, blank is going on. I just got a sense to mention, is there anything to this? Inviting people, if they say no, I'm like, I get these thoughts and sometimes I'm onto something, sometimes I'm not. Now, just because nobody joins me in that moment, if there's any fear or anxiety in the room or just not yet formed as a group to have an honest conversation, it might be a seed that's planted and it breaks. Someone might come up and talk to me and say, you know what, you were onto something. So I'll still say it. And if nobody picks up on it, in 35 minutes, an hour or two later, somebody may come back to it, not directly, but I just know that these intuitive thoughts and parallel process are real. Group may not be ready, and yet my responsibility is to be a clear instrument and put them out. Another way I share, I might say, in other organizations, people often encounter X or a pattern is that an issue here at all? So I get an intuitive hit, a sense to bring something up, and then I put it out in a way that's not accusatory, that's not, I know for sure, definitive, just as a kind of a softball, and see if anybody wants to try to swing at it and hit it. Always, I'm checking in. If it's an intuitive thought, I do a solid gut check and heart check and say, is this really intuitive, or I'm coming out of a trigger or my own roots? And does it meet the needs of the group in the moment, the learning possibilities in the moment? Can the group handle where I think this could take us? Just because I get intuitive thought doesn't mean I can't wait 5 minutes. I may want to write it down. Usually I do offer them in the moment if it's kind of a flowing. So I just want to offer that idea to trust your body, trust your intuition, particularly if you've been working, finding a way to be in the world that you're more open to your intuitive thoughts. All right. The last major thing I want to talk about is activist, facilitator, educator, presenter. When you share, what is the style from which you're coming? Now, again, this is Dr. Bailey Jackson. He was a major professor of mine at UMass Amherst, the dean of the School of Ed. And in a training facilitators course he taught, one session he had us think about each of these and say, which is your go-to preferred style? And then we would move. He did a little four-corner activity, and then we would talk to anybody who's there, kind of, why is that our preferred style? What are the benefits usually? Any possible drawbacks? And then to anticipate what could be the benefits of each of the other styles. Because I think, at least for me, I'm really good at, if I chose activists, I can really see the downsides of all the other three. But it's a strategy to really help people see the benefits and when those might be useful. That could be a great activity in general if you're doing any training facilitators. Now, these may not be the 4 words he used. This was 30 years ago. But I think I'm in the ballpark, and these are 4 that are distinct enough that make sense to me, and you can come up with your own as well. These may not work for you, but the idea is enough of a difference among different styles of holding the space for learning, and then think about, when do you go to them, consciously and unconsciously? But before we get to what's on the slide, I want to give you my understanding of these terms, and your understanding might be very different. Now, be clear that in a workshop, if I'm doing a train the trainer, I don't define these for people, but since this is a video, I thought I'd at least give you what I'm meaning by them and see if you relate to any of these. So the activist part of me, when I'm in my activist style, I'm speaking up, speaking my truth, naming dynamics. I often come out. It's not always a fight energy, and I don't mean in the unproductive stress reaction, but just kind of like I feel grounded and boom, this is what I believe. I'm trying to create change. And do it often with sharing, telling, as opposed to, I could be an activist and ask questions, but usually when I'm an activist, I'm giving my opinion or my thoughts. Facilitator, I think we, in that style, we're asking questions, trying to get participants to engage the material, engage each other We're curious as we're engaging folks. We're getting participants to be curious, having dialogue with each other, trying to facilitate learning and insights through engagement. The educator, again, there may not be a lot of difference among these, but for me, educator, when I'm in that grounding, I'm really focused on having people explore, learn, practice concepts, models, skills, tools. I'm trying to really impact learning and awareness. Now, I might talk about them. I tend to embed them in worksheets and activities, whether I'm teaching a model or skill. I might use storytelling to try to educate. I may model skills, and I might, if I'm watching the group and I see someone do a wonderful group dynamic skill or a wonderful leadership skill, I tend to highlight it. I'm like, I really appreciate what you just did. Did y'all notice what they did? What was the impact of what they did? So I educate through highlighting what I see are useful ways that the group is engaging or someone is showing up in really a new way of being a leader. And then finally, presenter. In my understanding, for me, this is more one-way communication, kind of like what I'm doing on this webinar. It might be a keynote, lecturette, an input piece. If you had a chance to look at, as I've asked, kind of those webinars on design facilitating, when you get to things like panning or pairs or privileged marginalized group dynamics, there are opportunities to do some input there. Now, you can be engaging as a presenter. I think the stereotype is it's kind of dry and lectury, but you can be incredibly engaging, as well as you can intersperse experiential applied activities to get people to learn the material, use the material, and give them a break from listening. I do believe there's research on how much people can hear. Someone just sent me some research last week that it's about 15 minutes for people who are K-12, maybe even early college if they're traditional age, to be able to sit and listen and take in. I've also seen data that actually in a lecture format, people might remember 10%. So I really hope you're taking notes as you listen to this, because that'll help you remember and learn. And again, you get to watch these over and over, however much you want in the 6 months. All right, I hope that was useful to give you a flavor of what I'm thinking about. The point here is that there are different ways to engage, different ways to be as a person in a workshop leading, and to be conscious of when you use your voice, feelings, impact, telling a story, which of these you're coming out of. And so just take a moment. Which is your go-to style, your preferred style? Unconsciously, as you're designing and you're setting up your role, are one of these how, or two of these how you tend to, oh, wait, now I think about it, that's kind of how I do it. Are you intentionally in moments trying to use some of these different types of styles because it's needed in the moment? Either the group has shown up, it could be useful, and or the material you're about to share might be better heard or taken in from a different style. And then I want to ask you when you're triggered. Is there a style you go to when you're triggered? Out of your privileged identities, out of your marginalized identities, because they might be different. I find and also people I seem to co-facilitate with, when we are triggered, we tend to go to the teaching telling, more direct. I'm not saying that's everybody, but I offer that as something to kind of measure yourself against and notice. I also want you to talk with some of your colleagues and really look at when is each useful. And there are times I believe each and all of these are useful. Given the group dynamics, the learning outcomes in the moment, the group memberships, the emotions in the room at the time, where we are in the design, any and all of these might be useful, but I want it to be an intentional use of self in what your style is. And then can you do all the other styles, all of them, your preferred and all the others when they're needed? Now for me, I think I tend to be facilitator, educator, particularly when I'm live and in a room with people. Activist, I'm actually an activist at my core, and I use facilitator and educator to create change, to meet people where they are and help them move along to where the organization says they need to be or where social justice says people need to be, in my opinion. I find when I come in with activist energy, people may shut down. There's a lot of pushback, resistance, and so I tend to keep the activist part of me in check. And I'll use movies, stories, getting other people sharing to bring the activism in the room. But as facilitator, I'm trying to hold the container for them all. That's at least how I do it. Now, occasionally, I will use my activist self to join in, to stir. If there's flat energy, I might use it to try to get energy moving, more people engaged, to get people in their hearts and their feelings. And when I am not present and I trigger myself and I'm into activist mode, especially in this current context, I can come across in ways that if I'm in an area where there's a wide range of competence as well as socially different perspectives politically, then my activist self may not facilitate learning in the way that I want. And finally, presenter is my least preferred, and I am least skilled and competent when I don't have notes. When I'm doing a keynote and I have notes and slides, I always do interactive keynotes, and I think it'd be very powerful. But to stand up without notes and try to do an input piece during an 8-hour workshop, it is not my preferred style. I'm not as good as some of my co-facilitators. And so if I'm by myself, I use activities and worksheets to try to teach these concepts, and I'm really good playing off of what people say. I think it's partly I'm an extrovert, so I need to work off of people. But if I'm there with a co-facilitator and they have a strength around this, so I'll be like, you play to strengths. Teach panning pairs, privileged marginalized dynamics, whatever else the topic is that you think a short lecturette input piece makes sense, go for it. I believe we need to be clear instruments in this work. And so before the workshop, at every break, every small group, if there's a engaged conversation, you notice yourself kind of a little trigger, just do a body scan, work yourself, work your triggers so that you can be clear on your positive intentions and show up in ways that you can use your voice, yourself as an instrument for change, sharing stories and examples, sharing your feelings real time in the moment, sharing the impact of what you're experiencing from people's comments, behaviors, what's going on in the workshop. We can be very powerful tools in this work using ourself as one of our instruments. Look forward to seeing you in the next video.